Hello guys, Harry W07 here, and today we're going to have an in-depth review for actually how many cores do we actually need for gaming. The test bench I'm using includes a Xeon E5 2680 V2, which is a 10-core 20-thread monster. I'm also using 8GB of DDR3 1600MHz RAM. I will eventually upgrade this to 32GB of RAM. I'm also using a GTX 760 that is similar to a 1050 in games. Hyperthreading is enabled for all tests, but remember I am also recording using OBS, so that will hinder performance quite a bit, so you'll probably see higher performance in real life. I can simulate different amount of cores by going into my BIOS and actually changing how many cores are enabled. This lets me do these kind of tests. I am going to be using Argo, CSGO, and Battlefield 1 for my benchmarks. I'm choosing these games that they have a wide range of CPU and GPU usage. Let's get right into the first benchmark, 1 core. Spoiler alert, this is going to be really painful. As you can see, in Argo, we're getting an average of about 7 FPS. Really not the best. And also you can see that CPU usage is at 100% the whole time, while the GPU usage is only at 35% or so. This means that the CPU is bottlenecking the GPU a ton, leading to this really low frame rate. In CSGO, it's not that much different, but we are getting an average of about 30 FPS. For some reason, the screen recorder really didn't like CSGO, as it looks more like a slideshow than an actual video. But trust me, it was about 30 FPS, so this is playable, but really not that good. As you can see, the CPU usage is still 100%, so the CPU is still bottlenecking the GPU, even in a really light game like CSGO. In Battlefield 1, this is probably one of the most CPU intensive games we're going to be playing. You can see that we're going on average about 10 FPS, really not the best again. The CPU usage is again, unsurprisingly, at 100% the whole time, and the GPU usage is only about like 25%. So this shows that Battlefield 1 is actually really quite CPU intensive, and that the CPU is bottlenecking the GPU like crazy in this test. Even the opening video in Battlefield 1 was really choppy. You just don't usually see something like that. That was 1 core. It was awful. It was such a bad experience. The CPU was bottlenecking the GPU at all times, but luckily all modern CPUs, even the really low end ones, now have at least 2 cores, so this test was done just to see how bad 1 core really was. Now let's go on to the 2 core benchmarks. With 2 cores in Argo, the GPU usage is much higher, but it is still being bottlenecked by the CPU. The frames per second is about 25 FPS, so it's way better than it was, but still really quite choppy at times. It is a much big improvement over 1 core, but still really not that good. In CSGO, we're getting a really quite high frame rate. This shows that CSGO really isn't that demanding. The CPU is still at 100% usage though, so the GPU is actually still slightly being bottlenecked. I am recording though. The thing is though, the recorded video is still really choppy. I don't know why, but it seems like my screen recorder just really doesn't like CSGO for some reason. It might just be that it isn't enough CPU performance. We'll find out later. With 2 cores in Battlefield 1, the CPU usage is at 100% the whole time. The GPU usage never gets higher than about 40% though. This shows that Battlefield 1 is very CPU demanding, and that it is still bottlenecking the GPU a ton. The frame rate is averaging about 25 FPS, so it is just playable, but still not a good experience overall. So that was 2 cores. It was much better than just 1 core, but in every single game, the GPU was still being bottlenecked by the CPU, so I still couldn't recommend a dual core for basically anyone, even if you're going to be doing light gaming. And if you're doing any kind of recording or streaming, you should forget about it straight away if you look at my CSGO benchmark. Let's get right into the 4 core benchmark. In Argo, the GPU is now the bottleneck. This is a good thing. It means that we're using the GPU to its full potential, while the CPU is really only staying at like 50% at max. This means that with 4 cores, the CPU isn't bottlenecking the GPU anymore. We are also getting on average about 50 frames per second, and that's what I usually get with Argo anyway. This shows what it's like without a bottleneck. In CSGO, we're getting about the same performance as we got with the 2 core, but the difference is now, the CPU isn't always at 100%. It is still very high, but it isn't at 100%. It's probably quite high because of the fact that I'm recording, so it'll probably be lower for you. But this shows that if you want to do any kind of recording, you at least need a 4 core, nothing less. In Battlefield 1, with 4 cores, the average FPS is in the 70s. The CPU is no longer the bottleneck, and that's a good thing. The CPU though is still in the high 80s, so if you want to do anything else in the background, like browse the web, play a video, it will probably hinder your performance quite a bit. I am recording though, so in real world it will be less, but if you want to do any kind of streaming, I'd still recommend at least a 4 core because of this reason. So that was the performance with 4 cores. As you can see, it was a much bigger improvement than 2 cores, and in most games they couldn't even utilize the full 4 cores. But for streaming, it is still a little bit close to comfort, as the CPU was at like 80% for most of the times while I was recording. Next, we're going to try 6 cores. I would usually could just jump straight to my 10 core beast, but because of the fact that there's the new Intel Coffee Lake CPUs out, I thought it would be a good idea to see what 6 cores would be like as well. In Argo, we're basically getting the same performance as we got with the 4 core. The difference being now though is that the CPU usage is 10% less than it was without the 2 extra cores. This means that it's much better for any kind of streaming, or if you want to do things in the background as well as just gaming. In CSGO, we're seeing the same kind of trend as we saw in Argo. We are seeing the same performance as we did with 4 cores. The difference being now though, that the CPU usage is way less. Like, I'm talking about we're only getting to about 50% at max. This means that it's very good for any kind of streaming, and anything you'd want to do in the background as well. This shows why extra cores can be more useful, but are not really necessary for normal average gamers. It is basically exactly the same in Battlefield as well. We are seeing that the GPU isn't being bottlenecked by the CPU, and that the CPU is only getting to about 60%. So as I said before, this is very useful if you want to run basically anything in the background without hindering your gaming performance. So that was 6 cores. 6 cores is about the perfect balance between gaming and productivity as well, like if you want to do streaming in the background while gaming. So let's get on to the real reason why you're here. 10 cores. I'm going to tell you right now that 10 cores is going to be super overkill, and that basically no game will be even able to get close to even 50%, let alone 100% usage. So let's get right into the 10 core benchmarks. In Argo, as you can see, the performance is basically similar to a 4 core and a 6 core. The difference being though, is that the CPU usage is like at 15% the whole time. That is absolutely insane. You could probably edit a video in the background and export it while playing a game, and you'll still see no drop in performance with this 10 core. So this 10 core will be basically overkill except for the most demanding applications like virtualization and that kind of thing. In CSGO, we're seeing a similar story. Basically the same performance with a 4 core and the 6 core. Difference being though is that the CPU usage is way less. In this case it's about 35%, but it does go down to about 25% when I'm not recording. Even though at 35% while recording, that's absolutely insane. You could be streaming, video editing, and doing anything else all at the same time with the CPU. And finally, similar to everything else, Battlefield 1 is staying at about 30% CPU usage, so this is totally overkill for basically anything. So as I've already said, you can basically use the CPU for basically anything. You could be streaming, playing games, and exporting a video all at the same time without the CPU breaking a sweat. So, my final verdict is basically that 1 core is not enough for anything, 2 cores is enough for very light gaming, but really not that useful for anything else, and I still wouldn't recommend it. 4 cores is like the perfect sweet spot if you're just gaming, but if you want to do any kind of streaming or anything like that, I would recommend you to at least get a 6 core, because of that 6 cores, you have those extra 2 cores that can come in very handy if you're doing things like video editing or streaming. And then the 10 cores, you really don't need a 10 core CPU. Don't even think about it. You really don't. If you think about getting a 10 core, just don't. They're usually too expensive and really just not worth it. You may be wondering right now, why do I own a 10 core then? For me, it's quite simple. I do this thing called virtualization. Basically, I run these things called virtual machines, which basically are computers inside your computer. They use a lot of cores and threads, which I need, and it also means that I can play games while having these virtual machines in the background. But for normal people, you really don't need one, unless you're doing very specific applications like Blender and things like that. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, if you disliked it, you know what to do. Please subscribe for more videos like this, and tell me what you thought about it in the comments. HarryW007 out.